Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Kieran. I work at the University of Manchester, and I'm really excited to welcome you to this session today, which is part of our Asia Careers Insight series taking place throughout the month of March. Today, I've got with me Jiao Li from Crayfish to talk to you about big companies or small startups. Which one is the right fit for you? Jiao will be going through the different options and give you some practical tips to make an informed choice when deciding your first when deciding how to make your first professional steps into the professional world. So without any further delay, I'd like to hand over to Jiao just to let everyone know we'll be taking questions at the end, but please do send them throughout the session. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Kira. Hello, everyone. My name is Jiao, and as you can see here, my company's name is called Crayfish.io. So today I'm here to talk to you about, when you graduate, should you go to a big company or should you go to a small startup? And last time when I actually did this session, there were students who asked the question, instead of joining a small startup, shall I actually start my own business? I prepared to touch upon that topic a little bit today as well. So along the way, if you have any questions, please feel free to send it and we will take the questions at the end. To start with, I would like to introduce a little bit about myself to you. If you are from China or if you are familiar with how Chinese map looks like, where I am from is from Xinjiang province, which is in the west of China. I came from a really small town in Xinjiang with merely 300,000 people. But if you put 300,000 people here in the UK, it's a huge town, or even it's a city level. But if you look at that perspective from China, it's a really, really small town. And then I went to Tianjin Nankai University, did my undergraduate there, studied finance. And in 2011, I actually came to the UK, did my master degree here in London School of Economics. Upon graduation, I was very lucky to be recruited by Unilever as one of the Unilever Future Leader Program trainees. And I managed to stay in London for another 2 to 3 years. And then the company actually asked me if you were interested to actually move back to China to basically learn a little bit more about e-commerce and digital, and then you can decide if you want to stay there or if you want to go back to London. So I actually took the challenge, went to Shanghai in 2014, stayed there for 3 years, and after those 3 years, I think I've learned enough, and also met my husband, and I made the common decision that we should joint decision that we should actually move back to the UK to pursue my future career. So I moved back to UK again in 2017, still with Unilever back then, but in 2018 I moved to Cambridge, which is a really beautiful city if you haven't visited it. Moved to Cambridge, met my CEO of Crayfish. She actually invited me in an event saying that, if you think you are entrepreneurial and if you think you are actually doing something that you are not enjoying that much, perhaps it's a time for you to make a change in your career. So I took up her advice, but it was not a quick decision. It took me almost 9 months to make the decision to quit the job from Unilever and to join her to start this company called Crayfish.io. Regarding what this company does and what we do, I will introduce it at a later stage, but here it's mainly about my own story. So that was in 2018. March in 2018, I actually joined Crayfish as the co-founder of the company and started leading the development of the marketing and sales strategy. And my responsibility actually expanded a lot from just marketing and sales, and now into including the technology development and HR. And sometimes I have to accompany with my CEO to report to our board members as well, which is quite an experience. So this is my career phase in a nutshell. So today, when we talk about startup or big company, the first question that I would like to clear up is, what is a startup? Now, everyone knows what a big company means, or everyone knows that what a really successful pre-IPO or mature company means. They either go public, they have very healthy financial flow, they have been there for a long time, and they have a very well prepared, very well organized structure there as well. Compared to a big company, a startup is a young company founded by one or more entrepreneurs to develop a unique product or service and bring it to market. Usually it's really early stage venture, and in a lot of case scenarios, it still hasn't made any money. So it's in search of a profitable business model with the investment from the investors. The key difference, I would say, between a startup and a business is its ability to grow. A startup is a company designed to scale very quickly. The scalability is one of the key standards to measure against a startup. It is a focus on growth. It is unconstrained by geography or by any standard. This actually differentiates the startups from small businesses. For example, you can call a restaurant a small business, but it's not a startup. And it's also not a franchise. Also, franchise model is not a startup. Usually, a startup is trying to solve a knotty, complicated problem that no one has ever solved before. So it's in almost exploring the uncharted territory. Those are, those companies are, brave ones among all the small businesses, and those are the ones that we are going to talk about today. So if you look at the life cycle of a startup, this is the chart on the right-hand side. Here it's around seed capital. Before you actually raise your seed capital and when you reach your revenue break even, there is a valley that we call it valley of death. This is when the majority of the startups fail, that they don't actually move to the next stage. Startups, unicorns among startups are really, really rare. In UK's data, 25% of the startups made it to the end. 70%, 75% of the business actually fail within the first couple of years, or within the first few years after they established. This is before they accept, when they have the angel investment and seed capital, those stage they will fail. But when they have met the break-even point, then they will have their first round, which we call Series A, Series B, Series C, and sometimes you can even hear of Series A plus, Series B plus. Those are not only the angel investors, the seed capital or the family friend rounds coming in the company. These are the VCs, acquisition and mergers that you need strategic alliances coming into the play. And once it reaches to the time that it's going to IPO, it's going to later stage, or it's going to the public market, we call the startup not startup anymore. It's startup graduate. In recent years, a lot of people actually has begun equating startups with tech companies, as though these two are inherently intertwined. For example, let's use Uber as an example. It's a car hailing app which has almost raised around $300 million in total funding, and its value now is $3.5 billion. Do you think Uber is still a startup? In my mind, it's not. It's already becoming a multinational company which generates a really high level of revenue. So even if it's a tech company, it's not a startup anymore. So essentially, a startup by definition don't have to be tech oriented. And when a tech startup has grown really, really big, it's generating multi-million-dollar profits, or it's achieving, it has more than 200 or 300 employees, it's not a startup anymore. As I mentioned, we call them startup graduates. So usually, companies fewer than 80 people, and in the previous 3 to 4, 5 years, we call them startups. But after that age, they become a normal company, SMEs, or they become, a really successful company, a bigger company. Now, what's the difference between a startup and a big company? There are loads of differences. Here, I would just like to point out a few. The first one is when you join a startup, the scope of work is quite different from when you join a mature company. When I joined Unilever, when I just joined, I was assigned to review the designs of some certain packages for almost a month. And after those, and during that 1 month, I've actually received a lot of different types of trainings, meeting up with different functions. But in terms of the job responsibility, it's quite niche, it's quite narrow. But if you look at when you join a startup or when a newcomer who actually joined us as marketing executive, in 1 month's time, his responsibility quickly became from just doing social media to almost, covering all executional part of marketing in a startup. And this is the first difference. The scope and the way that you grow will be quite different. This is not just when you join, but after you join, after 3 or 4 years of time, after you develop yourself as a more mature people in the career path. If you are in a big company, likely you will develop your skills vertically. So for example, if I'm in marketing, then it means that the majority of my time will be mainly focusing on marketing. And even in big companies, it can be even narrower. So for example, if I'm really good at e-commerce and digital marketing, then my role likely will be digital and marketing, digital and e-commerce marketing manager. However, after 3 or 4 years in a startup, likely you will be developing into an entrepreneur, meaning that you are actually developing into a well-rounded professional. So not only you will learn about how to do marketing, you will also learn how to do sales, how to basically talk to customer and clients, and sometimes you can even learn how to code, how to do coding, or you need to learn about finance, HR as well. So it's almost 2 different paths of career development. And when you are in a startup, a small startup especially, you will likely to have a small team and a lot of work will be done by yourself. But if you go to a mature company, it means that you have exposure to a much bigger organization and your team is likely to be much bigger than you can imagine. When I actually joined Unilever in Shanghai and when I left, it was around 3 years of time. I would say I only know 20 to 30% of people in that full business. The majority of people are the ones that I either heard of or I never met them, or I don't have to. When you're working in a small team, or when you are actually working in a startup, everyone is your teammate, is your colleague, and what you need to do is not only to work with yourself, you have to work with them together. But as I mentioned, the majority of time, you will be expected to deliver the result on your own. You won't have a lot of help or mentors or best practices or role models like you will have in big companies. And in big companies, as I mentioned, you will have a lot of counterparts. You have very mature, multifunctional teams. If you are in marketing, like what I was, you will have your R&D partner, you will have your HR partner, you will have everyone like you who's I hate to say this, but like a cog in a wheel to make sure that this huge machine is functioning properly. And when you are in a startup, you will have a mixed bag of investors or board members. So for taking us as an example, the first round of our investment is actually coming from friends and family. But if you go to a big company, you wouldn't even meet with investors unless you are in really, really high level, like the CEO, CXO level. They will almost be invisible to you. However, when you are in a startup, it's essential for you to learn how to deal with, how to communicate, how to keep your investor happy. And another huge difference between startup and mature company is the payment or the salary. In a mature company, they have a very well-structured payment system, meaning that, or salary system, meaning that when you join, you will be benchmarked against your peers, and at the end of each year, and in some companies, it's every half a year, you will be rated against some standards, and then you will then be decided if we are going to give you a pay rise, or if we are going to give you a promotion, and that's that. In some of the tech companies, big tech companies, they will give you options, but that's very, very limited. However, in a startup, instead of you have a very, I would say, stable or high monthly salary, it's more on the upside. So basically, you will be awarded shares and options, so that in the future, you and the founders will hope these shares and options will make you rich. They will give you actually much better upside at a later stage of your career stage. And of course, startup is more unstable. As I mentioned, only 25% of startup makes it. The mature companies, they will be there for 10 years, 15 years, 20 years. And another difference is for a startup, usually no one knows the company. So you have to contribute in building the brand together with the founders, with the founding team. But when you join a mature company, usually that brand name is already out there. People know this company, and it's like a label on you already if you are working for that company. This actually is one of the triggers for me to leave the corporate world, actually to join the startup, because when you are actually in a huge company such as Unilever, it's very difficult for yourself to justify how much value that you make to this company. So it's not very instant, or it's not very obvious. However, when you go to a startup, to actually bring a brand that no one knows to a brand that becomes more well-known, that's a very, very satisfying journey. So that's one of the reasons why I left the corporate world and joining a startup. So if you are really interested and you are still interested in joining a startup, what to watch out for when joining a startup? The first, and I think one of the most important thing, is the industries. A lot of people say that when you are in an elevator, you don't have to do much, you will go rising up. But if you are in an elevator that goes down, then even if you work really, really hard, it's very difficult. It will be very, very difficult for you to make a big breakthrough. This is the same for when you are actually choosing which startup to join, looking at the industry. If this industry is actually really on trend, or it's the industry that's going to develop really well in next 10 to 20 years, then it is a great industry for you to join. Now, this is the first standard, and second standard is definitely your interest, your passion. What do you enjoy doing most? Because when you join a startup, you really need a huge motivation to keep yourself going on a daily basis. It's not all fancy ping pong tables in the office. It's not all fancy working from home scenarios in startups. That's, I would say, an illusion that's created by a lot of tech startups later on when they're really successful. When you start a startup, it really, really requires you to be hardworking. So that means that the industry that you choose, the ideas that you are choosing to go with, you have to enjoy it. You have to be really passionate about it. So using China as an example, China is actually transforming to a digital economy. So if you are actually joining a startup in China, or if you are joining a startup which you would like to bring to China in the future, then there are several industries after the pandemic are really in trend. The first one is what we call new digital infrastructure, the enabling technologies. This includes the basic technologies that's actually power a lot of digital transformation in different industries. This is like 5G, IoT, mobile payment, AI, big data, blockchain, that type of thing. And the second one is digital health. After the pandemic, health issues and healthy related industries are really, really hot. So for example, telemedicine, remote patient monitoring, AI-based diagnosis platforms are becoming more and more popular. And last but not least is the education and the edutech. Also because of the pandemic, a lot of learnings are now done online, and this trend is continuing in not just China, but around the world as well. So online learning, live streaming solutions, AI-based tutorings are really popular as well. And in general, everything digitally related, so for example, e-commerce, or what we call new brands or new made in China brands, are very, very popular in VC circles now. It's because their relationship with the digital age. And the second thing, which is also, I would say, if the industry is the foundation that you make your decision, the leadership team, who when you join will actually bring you on board, who the founders are almost the fundamental question, the breaking point for your decision as well. Because as I mentioned, every startup has when you join, if it's a really early age startup, it's just 10 people, 15 people, 20 people. So the leadership style or who the leader is almost defines the nature of the company, the working culture of the company, and sometimes it decides the fortune of this company. One thing I would say often overlooked when considering a new job is the leadership of your prospective company. If you look at this chart, you could see from startup to mature company on the horizontal axis. On the vertical axis, you will see their years of experience. So we separate them into people who actually have done it all, so the serial entrepreneurships, and the industry veterans who actually graduated from the big companies. They have done really well in the big companies, and they actually are actually deciding to leave the corporate world and to start something on their own. Now, serial entrepreneurs will have a very different approach than someone who hasn't done it before. And mature company executive teams can be, what we call legacy leaders who actually can't be very flexible with the times. First of all, let's talk about companies, startups that funded by serial entrepreneurs. I would say this is your best shot. This is the best scenario, because these are the people who has done it before, seen it all. They likely will have good investor relationship already, so they usually won't have any issue raising money. And sometimes if they are serial entrepreneurs, they will have already had several companies successful, meaning that they already exited from them. Then it means he might already have some money to put in the company without anyone's help, which is a really ideal scenario. And they will know how to get the car moving. But the only thing that they might face is sometimes the past errors might haunt them. So they sometimes tend to overcorrect in areas where they failed the first time. Sometimes they overanalyze, or sometimes they delay the decisions because of it. If you are interviewing with a serial entrepreneur, one of the questions I would definitely recommend to ask is what they have learned from their first or from their previous company's experiences before. By asking this question, you will understand how they actually deal with the failures and how they correct their mistakes. And another group of people, which is more and more in the startup world, is industry veterans. They are actually doing their first startup. Founders coming from mature companies, they all have very big company confidence. They will be great at folding a team or leading teams, but sometimes because they have never done it so small, it can be very difficult for them to get their hands dirty, to do very practical executional levels of stuff. And sometimes it might be difficult for them to get the MVP, so minimum viable product out the door, and work towards the product market fit. And the startup with limited leadership experience is working with a skilled group of founders or leading teams. These are the majority of the startups out there, to be honest. So the majority of the startups are the ones with limited experiences, and they're doing their startups. The good thing about this is when you join, you will be instantly valued as a very important part of the team. And although they have limited experience managing board investors teams, or sometimes they made mistakes along the way, but it's great that you actually joined to grow with them together. You can witness how they grow, and even then you can also grow into a co-founder, or you can even grow into a very, very important role in these types of startups. And for people who don't have so many experiences, but they actually are very successful building a mature company, I have to say, they are really, really lucky, and they are really, really smart. People like this, like Mark Zuckerberg, right? Facebook now is a huge, huge company. He's very lucky, and he's really smart. But most importantly, he actually built a really, really great team around them. However, this type of leader sometimes can struggle with vision roadmap because they haven't done it before, and they are quite young, to be honest, so they can suffer from having people in roles that have outgrown their own experiences. So these are almost 4 types of leadership style that you can choose from. So when you join, I would say understand really well what type of leadership that you are facing, and understand yourself as well, in which environment that you are going to grow better. And the next thing is very important for when you're trying to join a startup is you have to know the team. Usually when you do interviews for big companies, you will meet your line manager, and sometimes it's a skip level line manager, so line manager's manager, and some cross-border colleagues, but you wouldn't get the chance to meet the whole team. However, when you go to a startup, I would strongly recommend you that you meet the team before you actually decide to join. First of all, you need to do, as I mentioned, monitor the leadership style is just one thing, and you need to do a founder's audit. Do the search, make sure that the company's founder is really good for you, and they will make sure that you are taken care of, and you will go along with them. So as I mentioned, there are many startups out there. There will always be one startup that suits you best, and the founder is one of the key reasons of it. And before you actually join the team, I strongly recommend that you spend a few days with the team to see if their way of working actually suits you, and their culture and behavioral fit it actually fits you. The reason why this is so important is, as I mentioned, startup usually has relatively small team, and startup requires really hard working, and sometimes there are huge ups and downs. You have to make sure that this is a group of people that you have to enjoy working with, and you literally like them, or sometimes even love them from the bottom of your heart. Otherwise, it will be very difficult for you to get through the difficulties together, or to get through the barriers together with the team. And also, because you have to be really hardworking, it means that from almost 9 o'clock in the morning, and for the majority of startups, you will also work in the evening. So almost out of 24 hours, 15 hours, 10 hours, 12 hours, you are going to spend the time with your colleagues, with this team. So you have to make sure that you like them, you are actually culturally and behaviorally fitting. This is very important. This image is just between the first lockdown and the second lockdown this year. We actually did a small team gathering in Cambridge with our work experience students and with our team together. It was very nice. And last but not least is when you join a startup, although a lot of startups will fail in the first 3 or 4 years, you would like to make sure that your company is not that one. So it has to be long-term viable. These are the questions that you should ask during the interview. So I always say that when you are going to be interviewed with a startup, it's not like a traditional interview for the companies to interview you the majority of the times. But when you go to a startup, it's more like a mutual interview when the founder actually they have to make sure that you fit with the company, and it's your responsibility to make sure that this startup is the one that has the best chance to success from all your choices. So how do you make sure that it's long-term viable? These are the questions that you should ask. First one, do you have product market fit? So if the product is already out there, do you think it will be well received by the market? And the second one is, what's your current growth rate? A lot of companies or startups, as I mentioned, the scalability is the key to measure a startup. If the growth rate is really low and the company is already 3 or 4 years old, you have to be really aware of the possibility of sudden change of the growth rate. Is that really possible? Or you have to quit, or you have to make sure that you are aware things have to be done before you actually join the company. And the third question is, what is your runway? Runway means that how much cash the company has in the bank and how long can they burn it. If the healthy runway is around 1 year to 2 years time, if the runway is really short, for example 6 months of time, it means that the company will go out of cash in 6 months of time. And if they don't go out for another fundraising, the company will go bankrupt. So it will be very, very dangerous. Sometimes even 12 months is a little bit short as a runway. Usually you would like to see a company with 2 years runway in the bank. And the fourth question, this is a lot of startups will come to you and say that we don't pay you as much as big companies, but we do offer you options. So when you go there, you have to make sure that when they are offering shares or options, are they offering shares or options? The difference between shares and options are the shares are given to you. So even if you leave the company, there's no any criteria attached to the shares. You have it, you will then become a small stock owner or a small share owner, so small shareholder of the company. Options are quite different. Options are always with standards, with criteria. So usually there is a vesting plan for options. It takes almost 3 to 4 years for these options to become shares for you. So you have to be aware when you are actually going into the later stage of the interview, when they are offering you, are they giving you shares or options? I'm not saying which one is better, but usually when you are newly graduate, usually people give you options instead of shares. And the last two questions are, what percentage of the company do these shares represent? So sometimes the company have 1,000 shares and they give you 1, and sometimes the company have 100,000 shares and they give you 10. So it's not about the absolute number of the shares or options. It's more about how much it represents in the cake. And the last question is, what's the minimum price you would exit for? This is actually testing the longer vision of the founders. What's their plan for this company? So this will also give you a brief feeling of what the upside will be if the company is successful. Now, after these questions, then it comes to a moment then you need to make a decision. Should I go to big company or should I go to startup? There are pros or cons in both sides, and there is no right or wrong answer for you to choose either way. But it's very important for you to learn which should come first in your journey. The pros in big company, definitely you have many resources, you have the job security, the company won't go anywhere in 2 to 3 years time, and you will have a proper mentorship, you will have the proper training program there you can learn from who knows it. The startup, the good thing, as I mentioned, it's the upside, the possibility that you get rich in the future. and the breadth of the scope of work that you are going to have. And also the ownership and responsibility is usually much bigger in startup when compared with a big company. And also when you just join a startup, those are the people who actually build the company, build the product. They're usually very, very passionate about what they are doing. Then, that passion can actually reflect on you and influence you as well. The downside of a big company, as I mentioned, it can be sometimes frustrating, of the long process, of sometimes the political debates going around in the company. You have to manage up, you have to manage down. People skills are one of the key skills if you want to work in a big company. So if you are not so bothered with that, then big company can give you security resources. For startup, of course, it's the risks. The companies can be gone within one day or one night, and for the majority of startups, as I mentioned, you have to work really, really hard for the first 3 to 4 years. So you would never have a good work-life balance as what you will have for big company. And also, as I mentioned, in a startup, you are expected to deliver almost from day 2. We always compare startup to basically going to the war. So they just give you the gun, they give you a spoon fed of beans, and then just send you to the war, go, off you go. So that's how it works in startup. But if you learn, if you really enjoy learning while doing, then startup is the right place for you. But which one to start with? As I mentioned, there is no right or wrong answer. It really depends on your answers for these questions. Do you know what your dream career would be? That's the first question that I would ask myself, and I would ask you as well. So there is always a question that I tend to ask all the interviewees is, imagine in 10 years time, give me one day of your life, what that day will be. So basically, from the minute you wake up to the minute you go to bed, exactly what are you going to do? So this question actually was asked by one of my friends back then when I was making the decision of joining startup or staying in Unilever. And then I said, okay, by then I will be in my late 30s. I hope I will have a company with 30, 40 people, not so big office, but I own the company, and I'm creating something on my own. Then I realized by being in Unilever, I will never achieve my dream career. So that's when I made the decision, okay, I will quit. So that's the first question that you need to ask yourself. What would you like your dream career to be? And second of all, what's your motivation? Is your motivation more towards the work-life balance, that you have a very clear defined career path, that you go up the ladder and you actually join a big company to do great things with great people? Or your motivation is actually you are really excited for doing something that no one has done it before? Or are you really excited for actually bringing up a brand who have never heard of before? So what's your motivation? This is actually the thing that keeps you going. And the third one is, how do you learn and how do you work? This is also very important. If you would like to learn from a more systematic way, or if you prefer that to learn from someone else instead of doing it on your own, then you're better off being in a big corporate. And also, how do you work? Are you comfortable of working on your own, finding out all the solutions on your own? Or you enjoy actually working with multifunctional people, or you enjoy actually working by having different types of meeting external providers? How do you work? That's also a very important question. And what kind of influence do you want? Usually, and also how quick do you want that influence? As I mentioned, in big company, it's very difficult for you to know it's you or it's a brand name or it's the team who actually made the influence to the results. You see the data coming out, okay, so the sales has grown 5%, 6%, but it's very difficult for you to learn what parts of the success that belongs to you. But if you are in a startup, the things that you do today will immediately reflect on the results tomorrow. Then you know you actually learned from your mistakes or you learned from your success. And last but not least, what environment will really help you succeed? If you really don't enjoy stressful life, you don't actually, having dreams at night, thinking about, what I would like to, doing something on my own in uncharted territories, I would be very comfortable in a little bit of chaotic environment, then big company is better for you. It's more stable. You have a daily routine of life, and you know what's coming tomorrow, what's coming next month, and you have a better work-life balance. It's big company. But for small company, it's stressful. There are times that you think, oh, there won't be anything good happening in my life, and there will be nights that you stay up really late. However, there are moments where you can feel that your adrenaline coming up, and there is moments that you feel that you are successful, and there are moments that you feel that I'm really proud of myself, of what I have done, and that makes sure that you are better fitted in an entrepreneurial world. So as a summary, the difference is the pace, the size, the approach of doing things, and the most important, the mindset. And those, what I just talked about, are about people who are actually going into joining a company. But when you're starting your own company, so when I talk to young people, usually these are the reasons that they use for, I better start my own business, or I better start my own startup. The first reason they gave me is I want to become rich quickly. And the second is I want to be my own boss. I don't want to listen to anyone. And the third one is, I think I have a great idea. And fourth, I want to have full control of my working hours. I don't want to have, early morning calls. So unfortunately, they can't be the real reasons for you to start your own business. If you want to become rich quickly, you think that business can bring you huge money, and you want to do business to earn money only. If this is what you think, business is not your place, or startup is not your place. Startup is about solving problems. It's about bringing good to the society through your ideas, through your effort. If you really can solve people's problem, then the money will come. But if you run after money only, thinking that that I would be rich quickly, to be honest, there is every chance you will not even have enough money to keep you survive. And the second, I want to be my own boss. Yes, you can be your own boss. However, you have clients. And a lot of times, if you are the employer, your employees are actually your boss. So you have to make a lot of compromise. You have to commit to a lot of things that when you are working in big companies, you wouldn't have to. And the third one, I think I have a great idea. Loads of people in the world have great ideas. If you start a business, someone will buy you out with a lot of money. If you think that way, there can be such stories. However, as I mentioned, it's about driving a mission, believing in something. It has to work really hard to make sure that idea actually becomes reality. That's the process where the majority of people thinking, okay, I have a good idea, I can do that, from the fact that only 3 or 4 people in that same industry has done it. Now, the last but not least, I want to have full control of my working hours. Unfortunately, that means that you don't have to have, perhaps you don't have to have early morning calls. That means that you have to stay up really late at night, reading calls and making phone calls to people in different continents, and even writing blogs and that type of thing. So yes, you have full control of your working hours, but that means you are almost working 24/7. So starting your own business is sometimes a fabulous idea, but it can be very difficult. As I mentioned, startup is a lifestyle. It's not actually a career. Climbing up ladders in a corporate world, it's a career. It's a separate thing from your personal life. But doing a startup or building a startup is more like a lifestyle. You have to be really committed. So that's these are just some images that when I was in Unilever, as you can see, I have loads of people around me from different functions. It was a really fun time. And these are the startup times. These are the great moments that you go out and you receive interviews from BBC. You went to different events, but there are moments where you have to do everything on your own. Here is the thing that we have to make sure that we catch everything that we need to go to a career fair. And but the good thing about startup, of course, you can bring your dog to the office. A little bit, I will spend next 2 minutes to talk a little bit about Crayfish. So essentially what we are is we are actually riding on the trend of freelancers. There are a lot of people nowadays who wouldn't like to have the 996 life in China. They sometimes, we call them slash youth or naked quitting, and a lot of them become freelancers, and 27% of them is actually working on cross borders. So essentially, there are a lot of challenges for the small businesses who want to do cross-border trade and collaboration. Sometimes they find it very difficult to manage multiple suppliers, and they find it difficult to access to multilingual and multicultural talent. And sometimes, it's very high transactional costs. That's why we are different. So what we do essentially, we offer fixed price services and marketplace where we connect businesses and service providers, i.e. freelancers. There are live projects on our website. People can actually post a project online and freelancers can come and bid for the project. Or we have fixed prices which are sold as e-commerce products. People can just buy the services online directly. And another very important initiative that we started in 2020 is called International Career Acceleration Network. It's called ICANN. It's a non-profit community initiative funded by Crayfish. We aim to create an effective communication and support mechanism and enable expanding career network and discovering more opportunities. This membership is open to global Chinese diaspora and multilingual professionals who can speak Chinese or who is studying Chinese with an international career. If you are interested, you can go to LinkedIn and search ICANN. You can just join, or here is a joining link. You can search and you can scan the QR code. That's all from me for today.
Thank you so much, Jiao. That was wonderful. I particularly enjoyed when you said that startups is really a lifestyle and not just a career, because you really have to dedicate your life to it. I'm very mindful of the time, so I really want to spend the next 10 minutes answering the questions that have come through. So, and then if the students do have any more questions, please send them through now, and we'll try to answer as many of them as possible. So one of the students has asked is, in your opinion, would you say that an employee is more attractive to a startup after they worked in a large organization for a few years, perhaps?
It really depends. I think it really depends on which industry and which type of company that you are joining, and at which stage this company is actually recruiting. So for example, I've talked to companies who at the early stage, they wouldn't want any people from the big companies because they think they are slow and they're too well structured sometimes. If you are spending more than 5 or 6 years in a big company already, a lot of startups will think can you take the risks? Can you be more flexible? They will put a question mark. However, if the company is at a later stage that they are actually quickly scaling up or growing up, they need someone with experiences in big companies in a very structured way of working. They would prefer you as well. But if you are actually joining a really small startup and they are actually recruiting from founder perspective, so like myself, when I actually start this together with my CEO, I'm from the big company, but she is not because of the big company she actually decides to do this together with me. It's more because of, if you have the entrepreneurial spirit that's required, or it's your professional background or expertise required for this company. So I don't think it's more preferable or not. it really depends on the company and yourself and how you actually develop yourself.
I will agree. I think it comes down a lot to your to how you sell yourself, whether you say I'm a fresh out of uni, so I'm very flexible and malleable and you can teach me what you want, and I'm not afraid to take risks to, I do have some professional experience, I'm ready for a career change. This is what I've learned and this is what I can bring in because I've been in that large organization in the past. A student has asked about like his meeting with a senior partner soon at the startup, and he was wondering about what sort of like interesting questions they can ask to sort of like set themselves apart. And I know we've touched a little bit more on that before. I know you're looking for the slide probably now.
Yes.
Would you got anything else to add, or would you say stick to that list and that will be that would probably set you ahead from the competition?
I would say if it's a startup, what they are looking for is they are looking for someone who can see the problem and who can come up with a solution. I would just use one example that I literally saw today as one great example for people how you can separate yourself from the competitors. I saw a post on LinkedIn from one of my startup friends. What he posted was one message from one candidate to him. That candidate was applying for a marketing and digital marketing role in his company. Instead of going through the traditional CV submitting process, what he did was sending her a message saying that, hey, Charlie, or whatever this person is called, I noticed that you haven't had a company Wikipedia page yet. Here is the Wikipedia page that I took the initiative to create for you. Do you want to have a look? 10 minutes later, he got a job. That's how quick the startup can be. So that's how he set himself apart. As I mentioned, startup is not just looking for people who can see the problem, who is a thinker. We are looking for a doer. So perhaps if I could recommend you to really look into what this company does and looking at the role or you're applying for or the potential opportunity that you currently have, do some case studies, give them some suggestions, or better or even better if you could do whatever the person did in the example that I described, that will truly impress the founders, thinking that this person is actually taking the initiative, being very, very proactive.
I think that brings me nicely to my next question is, a student's interested in an organization, but then the startup's like mission is not very clearly advertised online and they don't really have a big online presence. How would you recommend they go about obtaining additional information around that startup and sort of like, again, to make that first impression when approaching them about potential opportunities with them?
Yeah, so there are several reasons why this company hasn't had a huge online presence. The first reason can be they just started and they are just in the way of setting everything up. The second scenario is they are product was pre-MVP stage. So their product is still under development. They would like to keep as low key as possible to avoid competitions. So depending on different scenarios, I would say the easiest way is always to ask directly. So as I mentioned, interviewing with startups are quite different compared to interviewing with big companies. There are no defined structure on how you can do this. I would say, ask all the questions that you would like to ask during the first interview. And after this first interview or the second interview, if you two are really interested in each other, I would recommend that you suggest to spend a few days with them, as I mentioned in the previous slide, not just about exploring the team, more about understanding a little bit more about the startup. I hate to say this, but a lot of startups, in order to recruit people, they made themselves sound much better or sound much more advanced than their current status. The only way for you to figure out is first of all to ask the questions that I listed here, and second of all that you ask questions that you really do care, and then spend some time with them and watch how they do businesses. And if you are still not so sure, but you are still interested, that's what actually I did. I was for 6 months of time, I was part-time doing startup alongside of my full-time job. That will actually help you to make sure that this is actually exactly what you would like to do, rather than commit from day one.
Wonderful. And I'd say a lot of startups are possibly looking for students to work on them on projects before they even hire as like for full time or any other roles in the future. Um, I was wondering if you've got any recommendations about how students can go about uncovering those opportunities, because I do think that opportunities with smaller firms or with startups are part of what we call the hidden recruitment market. And how is like do you know of any websites, or do you have any recommendations about how to build those connections and
Yeah.
get to know people so to uncover those opportunities?
Yeah, there are a lot of different ways. First of all, you need to do the research. There are several websites. If you are really into technology startups, there's one website called AngelList, which I think is the biggest one for startup recruitments in tech scenarios. That's first one. And second one that you could go for is definitely LinkedIn. When you go to LinkedIn, you can actually select based on their stages of when you do job search, you can basically select based on the number of their employees. You can focus on small startups. And the third way of doing this is actually probably more suitable if you have 1 or 2 years experience. Then you can go for headhunters. A lot of headhunters nowadays, they are focusing on helping startups. So if you know 1 or 2 headhunter in those agencies, then they will help you link the dots between you and the startups. The fourth one is actually very interesting one, is also that I would like to put your mindset on, is joining a startup is almost like investing in a startup. So you should look at the criteria as if you are going to invest in them. So there are a lot of accelerators. There are a lot of investors websites. So for example, Crayfish is backed up by Cambridge Angels, which is a very famous angel investment community based in Cambridge. You can go to these types of websites. They usually have their portfolio companies on the website. So if you have known several really well-known VC funds, or you have known there are several really famous like Cambridge Angels angel investor websites, in their portfolio company page, there are loads of companies that they have invested in already, and they have done almost the vetting process for you because they decided to invest in them. So that's another way to go about this as well.
All right, so I'm keeping like a couple of things here. Is do your research, read the news that say go on LinkedIn, connect with people, and don't be afraid to put yourself forward. Is read through the jargon to sort of like understand what the company really does, and if they're sort of like trying to inflate what their market proposition is. And then following from what you said before, Jiao, is sort of like don't be afraid to be critical and ask questions, because they want people who are doers. Like startup companies want people who are doers and question things in order to improve their product. Otherwise you won't be really adding much into the company. So if I can sneak in one final question in, I know we're almost out of time, is what skills would you recommend that our students and soon to be graduates need to be working on right now to make it into the startup world?
So as I mentioned, going into a startup world or starting your own business are two different things, and it requires different skills. But in general, I would say that you have to have a really strong mind. That's, I think, the first thing that you have to be aware when you walk into the startup world. In a startup world, 100% of the time, the majority of your experience will be daily mundanes. That the things that you really need to get your hands dirty, the things that you don't want to do anymore in the next day, but you have to. So that you have to be really strong-minded to face these mundane things that you are doing on a daily basis. And the second thing is that you have to really be a critical thinker, and you have to be really entrepreneurial, meaning that you have to be really independent and you are risk-taking. because startup requires a lot of out-of-box thinking. So if you are just keeping the things that you have always been doing, you will never have the breakthrough. So it requires that you have to be a deep thinker as well. And third one is you have to be really proactive, and you have to be the one who is not afraid to take responsibility and to take it all. Because a lot of things that you have done in startup work, remember, it's uncharted territory, so no one ever knows what to do. So a lot of things, the 80% of the time you try will fail. So those 20% of time are the ones that will stay with you, and you will keep on, and they will become your very valuable experiences.
And for the students, for those specifically who are looking to start their own startup or business, in terms of like hard skills, would you say that you find that people who have the coding skills to build their own website or their own software, or have the business and finance background to understand and do their own accounting and sort of like register their organization through the sort of like official routes, tend to do better? Or is it something that you say it's okay to outsource, and at which stage you will do that?
Okay. Really good question. So when you start up your own business, I wouldn't recommend you do it on your own. The first reason is you can't have it all. You can't have all the skills that you need. So usually if you are CTO, so the technology side of the company, you can't have a very strong commercial side, or you tend not to have so strong marketing side. So you need someone who understands how to build a brand, or how to actually make sure that this product actually makes money for the company, who understand the financial quite well. So at least I think you first of all, you need to find a co-founder that compromise with what you complete the things that you don't have. And second of all, in terms of hard skills, if you are actually building a tech startup, definitely don't outsource your technology, because that's your IP. That's the thing that you are going to make money and that you are going to get investment in. But if you are not a tech company, then it's okay to outsource your technology. Definitely, it's the same, but I wouldn't recommend outsourcing marketing or sales, because this is the really important route for you to understand if your product has a market fit, and to actually build the brand within your own control. It's only at a later stage I think you can outsource this too, but to start with, this should definitely stay in-house. Finance-wise, a lot of people outsource it, because not all the founders have experience of raising money or raising funds. So they will rely on an experienced CFO to do that. So a lot of people actually outsource the financial part.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. I know that's all the time we've had here today, but I've definitely learned loads. If I can just keep one and highlight a few more things, is one, working at a startup requires a lot of resilience. Take a look and to make an informed decision, especially regarding who your fellow employees are, whether you can get along, visit them, do a project with them in advance before you make a final decision, and then go with whatever your gut and your passion is telling you. And I think it's definitely been very obvious that you do have a great passion for crayfish. So I will encourage all our students who are Mandarin speakers to look out for opportunities to participate into crayfish opportunities as well in the future. So thank you very much for this excellent session. It's been very informative and insightful. Any final pieces of advice from you before we end the session?
Thanks very much for having me today. If you still have unanswered questions, I'm happy to answer them through email. So you can just either send an email to me directly or to Kira, so that I can answer it all together. So I think to join a startup and to join a big corporate world, as I mentioned, there is no right or wrong answer. It really depends on how you work, how you learn, where you see yourself in 10 years' time. So good luck with whatever your decision is. I'm sure you will have a great journey.
Thank you so much. Just to reiterate, this session is being recorded, and when I circulate the recording, I'll make sure to include Jiao's email so you can contact her directly with any additional questions that you might have. Thank you so much once again. I hope you have a lovely afternoon.
Yeah, bye-bye.
Bye.